Let people know that you're an accomplished academic, but you also have other interests. And you're a fellow in the Brunswick group, even more important. So, on to some questions. After pondering this when we first discussed this 4 or 5 years ago, what motivated you to take on a project of this scope and scale?
Well, it certainly appealed to me. I've been working and writing about intelligence and military operations since the mid-1970s. Out of necessity, I concluded very quickly that you couldn't really write proper military history unless you studied the intelligence side of it. It wasn't always decisive, but it was always important. I'd also been consulting on intelligence-related topics for much of the period from 1980 on. So this seemed like an opportunity to put all that I had learned to work on a major project. It would build on what I already knew and would give me a chance to probe new subjects, new sources of information, and improve my own knowledge in the field. So it would benefit both CMIA and myself. It really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I see this as the capstone work of my career. So I was very flattered to be asked by Greg and Andrea, and it would have been very hard to say no.
Indeed, it would have been very hard to say no. Now, when you started the project in 2017, you provided the CMIA Board of Directors a scope and outline for the book, which has stayed, for the most part, the same. This was when Andrea was the president. And in your research and interviews, what surprised you the most?
Well, I think there's several things that come to mind. The first is the extent to which Canadian military intelligence is tied very closely into the Five Eyes and other international intelligence sharing arrangements in a wide variety of areas, not just signals intelligence, but in human source, technical intelligence, imagery, and so on. And the scope and the scale of this really impressed me as I went through source material. And the effects of it were much more significant than I had initially expected. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second is the types of expertise and capabilities the Canadian military intelligence was able to deploy, such as in the SIGINT areas of EW, imagery analysis, human efforts, and so on. What I saw was a kind of a maturation process over time. And this was forced by the pace of operational necessity. We really couldn't do the things we did operationally in places like Bosnia and Afghanistan and Kosovo without the skills and the technical capabilities that the Canadian forces were able to deploy. So that's the second thing that comes to mind. The third is that jumped off the pages of documents was the constraints imposed on defense intelligence by constant reorganization and budget cuts. These have real-time, real-world impacts on Canadian defense intelligence and military intelligence ability to serve their users, such as the prolonged gestation of adopting computers and the very long delays in the acquisition of UAVs. So there were real-time consequences to the constant turmoil that prevailed in the 80s and 90s, particularly in defense intelligence.
Okay. Now, a number of folks have talked about follow-on studies. For instance, Andrew and I, today, just a few hours ago, when we were getting ready for this event, talked about perhaps somebody someday should write a book about women in military intelligence and the contribution from World War II and onward. And others have talked about telling the story of the supplementary radio system and the railway, those who contributed to the defeat of the Soviets in a big way, and were constantly at war 24/7, and other things. And I know that the Air Force is writing history as well. Having said that, what would you offer as guidance for someone wanting to do a follow-on study or go into more depth on specific issues that you identified?
Well, first let me say that as far as I'm concerned, as a historian, one also always has to be very, very careful about thinking that you've written a definitive work in the field. The writing of history is never finished. And so my book has really, in many ways, only scratched the surface. There's a lot of scope for more work in this field. So future authors with more access to original sources could probe deeper into the operations that I've covered, and also examine those that are not covered in the book. They could look in more depth at capabilities and processes. They should collect people more than I was able to do. Tap into the personal and institutional memory banks before they fade. Perhaps CMIA could do this with its own kind of interview program with branch members as they retire. I would urge future historians to start requesting documents under access to information early because it takes so much time to get them cleared for release. So I would suggest doing topic-focused articles rather than trying to write another all-encompassing book until there's a greater body of original source material available. So those are some of the considerations to take into consideration as people approach doing more work in this field. But really, I hope the book has kind of opened the door and said, look at all of the things that are going on. You can build on this.
Indeed. So having said that, what are the areas that you would suggest for a sequel?
I think I'd start with domestic operations, actually. Disaster assistance and other use of the military, such as providing security at prisons and intelligence support to the Olympics, which has been done several times. There are many more peacekeeping operations to be studied. Maybe somebody could probe more, for example, into the Somalia intelligence story. There's a lot of material on it. And the challenge will be to say something unique that the inquiry didn't say. I didn't feel I could do justice to that in my efforts, and that's why that brief effort was excised from the manuscript. Then there's the Cyprus story from 1974 when Turkey invaded. We've done several operations in Haiti. They deserve attention. And then if we kind of shift the focus, there's the functional approach, intelligence support to anti-submarine warfare. For example, the role of SOSUS, or the story of the Bermuda base. A lot more could be said about intelligence sharing within the Five Eyes and NATO. And then how about a study of the attaché program? So there's so much more to be done. My book, I think, as I see it, is really just a start.
So Bermuda base is an interesting one. I had breakfast 2 weekends ago with a friend from my SIGINT days who served in Bermuda. Let's just say that there are stories about Bermuda that need to be told, and there are stories about Bermuda which are
Believe that. The location itself speaks for itself.
That's for sure. So every book that I've read of yours and the many presentations that I have attended, you have a very good way of wrapping things up to the conclusions and the findings. So based on that, what would you say are the most significant intelligence impact and success of operations?
Well, it's hard to single out only one or two things. As I already mentioned, being part of Five Eyes and NATO, and thus being able to receive the products of their special access programs, allowed our small intelligence cohort to really punch above their weight. But they couldn't have done that if they weren't good themselves, which they were. In this regard, SIGINT and imagery clearly were very important enablers. In every land operation, patrolling was the most constant and useful tactical intelligence generator. Integrating or fusing data from multiple collection sources was very significant in many cases. It provided clearer pictures of the targets that would have emerged from single source reporting and analysis. So there's a few things that jump off the page at me when I think of trying to wrap our heads around the whole big picture.
Indeed. So my next question is focused on, I think, the entrepreneurial side of intelligence, and that you have to market yourself to the commander, key staff, the unit you're with, all those things. But with that in mind, what would you say are the most significant challenge to intelligence supporting operations?
First off, timeliness and accuracy. Many operations show that it was hard to achieve both simultaneously. Sometimes you can get the story right, but it's too slow. Sometimes you can be really timely, but you don't have enough information to be sure that you're accurate. So that's one piece of the story. Deciding priorities and assigning collection platforms. Who gets what, when, and where. Also, unless you have a highly placed source, it's very hard to determine your adversary's intent. And we're living with that constantly day to day with the Ukraine situation. Finally, funding imposes limits on capabilities, their development and acquisition. It also constrains staffing, analysis positions, and impacted production, particularly in the 80s and 90s. So those are some of the challenges that really I decided that needed to be brought to people's attention.
I think, David, most of us would agree with that. We're moving onto something perhaps a bit more sensitive, but we have to talk about it from a professional and academic perspective. With the Defense Intelligence Enterprise Renewal, known as the DIER, ongoing and about to, I think, wrap up to some degree when we roll into the winter months, what cautionary message would you provide to the DIER team?
I'm a little hesitant to pretend that I have the expertise and knowledge necessary to provide any kind of real advice. But a couple of things strike me as being worth saying. It's going to be difficult to balance two essentials, the first of which is retaining proven capabilities, processes, and techniques that we identified in the history. And second, adopting and adapting to emerging ones. So we've got to hang on to the good stuff that we already do, as well as adapting and adopting new techniques and new processes and technologies. There's never going to be enough money to do both of those perfectly. It will also take time to gain new capabilities and also recreate those lost if they're needed again. So choose very carefully what you retain and what you adopt as new. I think I would leave my advice there. It may be a level of generality that may not be terribly helpful.
To a question on cyberspace, open source intelligence, artificial intelligence, digitalization, all those things that will have a profound effect on the intelligence enterprise. How do you think the enterprise should meet the challenges of these evolving issues and capabilities?
Again, that's quite a challenge, but let me make a few suggestions, if I may. It might want to consider whether it can achieve useful results and economies of scale through defense and commercial partnerships in intelligence collection. The war in Ukraine seems to have demonstrated the private sector can deliver timely and useful products. I'm thinking in particular, for example, of the imagery provided by Maxar Technologies. In the information operations domain, the British MOD, the intelligence staff, seem to have concluded that there is value in sharing their assessments of the Ukraine war with the public. Having said that, they might not be so open if the British forces were actually in combat themselves. But it seems to me that, again, this idea of defense and commercial partnerships offers some possibilities, and making assessments public to the extent that you can might help in the information operations side of things.
So the final question before we open it up to the audience, I guess is really one where you can wrap things up. But from your perspective, what are the benefits and challenges of writing a book of this scope and scale?
Well, the primary benefit that I felt I had was access to sources, in particular, if you like, human access to people. Greg and Andrea contacted people on my behalf and facilitated introductions. That opened doors because they were able to vouch for me and persuade potential interviewees of the value of the project. That would have been much harder had I just decided to do a book like this on my own. Likewise, having a security clearance as well allowed people to feel more comfortable talking to me. I was, as it were, inside the tent and could be trusted. Of course, I always made it clear that they could only tell me things that could be made public in the book. The principal challenge of writing a commissioned history, whether it's an official history or an authorized history and so on, is to persuade readers and reviewers that you've been able to write an objective history unfettered by institutional pressure or bias. The concern of readers and reviewers is that you were told what to write, how to write it, and what to leave out. That narrative and the narrative and conclusions were pre-cooked by your sponsors. I think I can assuage those concerns because when Greg and Andrea first invited me to write the book, I told them that I would like to write it, and they were very agreeable to that. I wanted to write an operational history, not an institutional one. And I wanted to write about the impact of intelligence on operations, not so much a history of the branch itself. I also made it clear that as author, I wanted editorial control over the content, and they agreed to those points. They didn't tell me what I could not write. That was defined by security classifications. I was cleared to secret. Anything higher would have been too hard to get declassified in time for the book. As it was, one of the access requests that I placed took 2.5 years to reach me. So fortunately, much of the story could be told from open and published sources and from interviews. And at no point did anyone tell me you can't say that. So I'm sure some readers and critics will be unconvinced, but that can't be helped. For most, I hope they will find it informative and enlightening. I also hope it will spur others to dig into the topics I suggested earlier, thereby adding to the story and enriching our understanding of Canada's military intelligence history. So there we are.
Well, David, I think the peer review speaks for itself. And this peer review is very positive. We didn't know who they were recently when one was identified, but I don't think either either. But the peer review, I think, will assuage people through that this may have been directed. And it's very clear in your writing that it's not. But I think both Andrew and I agree that the peer review was the cream on the cake, or the frosting on the cake. So before we turn it over to Andrea, thank you very much for your great answers. Thank you very much for being a good friend to not only me, but to Andrea, but to the intelligence function. And we look forward to hosting you on the 24th, 25th, and 26th of November.